Today I'm going to share my recipe for cream of tomato soup, and this is fresh cream of tomato soup made with fresh tomatoes. So these are from a local farm, and I love to actually grow tomatoes. My tomatoes are not this big or ripe yet, but I do have some on the back deck along with my basil plant. So I'm using the basil, the fresh tomatoes, some butter, salt, pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, milk, and I use whole milk. You could substitute almond milk or oat milk or something else if you don't do dairy, and a butter substitute. It's a pretty easy recipe to make, and a little bit of flour. So we're going to get started by boiling the tomatoes, and what we're doing is basically just blanching them. We're just boiling them in order to skin them. So you just want to boil them in water until their skins start to split, which looks like this. And then run some cold water over the top of them so that you can touch them and peel them. So you're just going to slip the skins off with your fingers. Much easier to do with two hands, but of course I am holding my phone to film in my right hand. So just doing it one-handed here. So you just kind of slip the skin toward the stem area and pull it off, and do that on both tomatoes. What we're going to be doing is basically we're skinning, coring, and then chopping these fresh tomatoes. And you can, again, use a single can, a large can of whole tomatoes. You can use 2 cans of diced tomatoes. You can kind of use basically any type of canned tomatoes to substitute for this, but I just love the taste of fresh tomatoes, and this just makes the flavor of the soup all the better. So these are hot. Obviously you can see the steam coming off the top. And what I did is I cored the tomatoes. What coring is basically is just taking that stem part out. You cut down in to the tomato a little bit to remove the hard part of the core, because you don't want that in your soup. And then we're going to just chop them up. You don't have to finely chop these. In fact, I kind of like some bigger chunks because I like this to be kind of like a stew soup, like a really hearty soup. So you will benefit if you have one of those cutting boards that have the little edge that catches all the juice that drips over, but I don't, so that's fine. Mine just kind of like runs onto the cupboard and I clean it up. But go ahead and chop those tomatoes, and then you're going to do the next step, which is to make your roux, or the base for your cream sauce. And that is done just by melting a couple tablespoons or 2.5 tablespoons of butter in the bottom of a saucepan. This is going to be your saucepan that you're going to make the entire soup in. So just melt the butter. I usually don't turn my burner above 5.5, maybe 6 for butter, because you really don't want that butter to burn. That will totally ruin the flavor of your soup or any kind of dish that you're making with a roux. So you just kind of want to move the butter around in the pan by tipping the pan, or you can get a spoon and stir it, but make sure that it doesn't burn on the bottom of the pan. And you're going to melt that butter and have your flour handy, because as soon as it's bubbling and melted, you're going to drop in about 3 tablespoons of flour and whisk that together, and just continue whisking until it's totally smooth. And you're going to have that, again, still just on the 5.5 or so for the heat setting. And you want to have your whole milk handy. So you're going to pour in, I didn't measure it. I think I poured about half of the container of, it's a quart of whole milk. So maybe like a couple cups or a cup and a half of whole milk, and just whisk that in. Make sure, again, to keep this really smooth as you're whisking. And you just don't want to have any lumps or bumps in your cream sauce at all. So whisk it really good, and then you're going to go ahead and get your seasonings ready for the next step. You want to add the pepper, the salt, the onion powder, and the garlic powder at this stage. And I actually like to use onion powder. Sometimes I just use fresh onions if I don't have onion powder, or vice versa. But the onion powder just makes it nice and smooth, and you don't have pieces of onion to chew. You can also substitute chives for the onion powder if you prefer. So just a little nice little flavor in there in the roux. And then you're going to want to bring that to a boil. So after it thickens the first time, you're going to add some more milk and just fill your sauce pot up kind of halfway or so. You want to make sure to leave plenty of room for the tomatoes. And you're just going to keep whisking, keeping that cream base really smooth. And at this point, you might want to taste it just to see if you need to add a little bit more of one of the seasonings or whatever. And then you're going to get ready to drop in all of those nice chopped tomatoes. And I use a wooden spoon at this point because they can get really caught in the whisk. Or you can use your canned tomatoes. You just want to continue to stir. You really shouldn't have anything sticking to the bottom of your pot. Again, I'm just keeping this at a number 6 on the stove top. And just continue, which is a medium heat. Just continue to stir that around and really incorporate the tomatoes throughout. Now for canned tomatoes they're more broken down into a sauce, but for fresh tomatoes I like to use a potato masher to just kind of incorporate them and get them mashed into that cream sauce because they aren't canned, so they're not really fully cooked, they're just fresh. So this soup is so delicious because it's fresh, but again, like just kind of breaking those tomatoes up does help incorporate them into the cream base. Then go ahead and drop your basil, chopped basil on top of the pan and stir that in. And I just used, I don't know, like 4 leaves or so. And stir that throughout the soup and kind of bring it to another slow boil. You just want to simmer it and make sure that it's the right thickness. You don't want it to be so thick that it's, you know, like doughy or anything. You also don't want it to be so thin that it's super watery. You want it to be nice and creamy, but also easy to eat with a spoon. So just stir it around, back and forth. I kind of just make sure that nothing's sticking to the bottom of the pan. And then you're ready to ladle it out into your bowl. And this is what it should look like when it's all finished. This is the finished product with just a nice bowl of cream of tomato soup. And these are some garnishments or toppings that you can use. Some nice warm buttered toast, some Ritz crackers, a spoonful of Parmesan cheese, a little bit extra basil. Any of these things really are delicious, or all of them. I kind of like to start with the Parmesan cheese, stir that in, and then go for the toast, which honestly, I could probably just use this as like a fondue of toast, because if I could eat unlimited buttered toast with this, that would be my favorite. However, that's not very practical or healthy. So anyway, this is just stirring in the Parmesan cheese, and you can see that the soup is nice and creamy and still pretty hot. You're going to want to let it set for just a little bit before eating. And this is the bread dipped in, which is just so delicious. Again, that's my favorite part. So let me know what you like to eat when you're in a hurry and you want to just make a quick meal. And yeah, go ahead and try this with either canned tomatoes, whole tomatoes, diced tomatoes, any type of canned tomatoes, or you can try this method with the fresh tomatoes since it is tomato season. So I hope you enjoy this. And this is actually my oldest son, Isaiah, his favorite soup. So this is kind of like a main comfort food for him. And I hope that someday he's able to watch this video and make the recipe himself when I'm not around. So yeah, it's kind of like almost as much a comfort food as chicken noodle soup or mac and cheese or whatever. If you like tomatoes and you like creamy soups and hearty soups with chunks of goodness in them, this has those tomato chunks. It has stuff to chew. It also is very filling. And if you want to eat a grilled cheese sandwich with it, that's also a nice addition.